Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Ikam Opara, and I am Director of National Learning Partnerships at the Rideau Hall Foundation. And it's my pleasure to join you today on the second day of Canadian Innovation Week as we have this conversation about grant making. It's a conversation amongst grant makers about how we fund technology needs of community organizations such as yourself. Before I begin, I would like to first of all mention that I'm joining you from the home of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, which is more commonly known as Pickering, just outside of Toronto. I would also like to acknowledge that the work that the Rideau Hall Foundation does, our partners on this conversation, and many of the organizations and communities that we connect with happens on a variety of homelands, ancestral and present day homelands of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. So I acknowledge our presence here and our ongoing negotiation of how we continue to live, play, and work on this land as good stewards and good relations. Before we go on, I would like to speak from the heart. Over the last few years, myself and many in my communities have once again been reminded of the tensions that exist in our community around race, around who we are, around our identities. The tensions that exist in our communities that are in some cases upheld, in some cases supported, and in some cases coddled by some of our actions, our laws, our policies, our inactions. A few days ago, there was a mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. Several people were killed. 10 people in fact were killed. 3 others were injured. 11 of those victims, 11 of those people whose lives were impacted directly and in this terrible way are Black, like myself, like some of the people you're about to listen to. The reason for this senseless and horrific action is hate. Yet we are here, and yet we continue to be here. So before we begin this earnest conversation about what we as organizations, as funders and partners can do on this issue of technology and how we connect, I ask you to remember that first of all, we ought to connect as people, as humans, and connect from a place of love and understanding. Yet we are here. Not very long ago, in our society, in our communities, the 4 people you have gathered here to listen to today would not be able to sit together in a room and have this conversation. Some of us were not considered persons under the law. Some of us could not speak our languages, wear our dress, and some of us, till this day, continue to feel the suppression. Before anything else, I ask you to remember that we are human, we are here, and we will not go quietly into the night. It is with love, courage, and a continued commitment to be in better relations to one another that I acknowledge what happened, what continues to happen. I pay homage and send up the names of those who lost their lives and were impacted by this. And I promise that we will continue to do this work, which is important to us. And on that note, let us begin this conversation. Let us engage on this topic of what it means to support the important missions of the organizations and communities that we are here to serve and to work alongside. To start this conversation, I would like to bring in my friend and colleague, Leon Wilson, who is joining us from the Cleveland Foundation. Leon is going to be sharing some thoughts with us about what it really means to support the missions of organizations and address this question of what technology really is to us, a tool, a solution, an ends, or a means. Leon is the Chief of Digital Innovation and Chief Information Officer at the Cleveland Foundation. This is what he does for work. He is a thinker, an excellent. We've had some excellent conversations preparing for this chat with you. So without further ado, I would like to pass it on to Leon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ecom. And what a great way to follow up from that very emotional and important conversation and topic that you want to address about the issue and the incident that happened this past weekend in Buffalo, New York, roughly about 2 hours away from my house. So I was asked to share my perspective to all of you as now an individual who works at a major foundation, but also as one who used to be in the trenches helping nonprofits, community organizations help identify and make better use of technology. And what have I seen? And to set the stage for a more robust panel discussion that we have. So I don't have a lot of time, but there are three things I really want to touch on when I talk about this. I want to talk about how we position funding technology for nonprofits in our community, where we've been and where we're going, and where we've been and also where we're going. So to first start off, I'm always reminded of this one graphic that I saw at a conference hosted by N10, one of the sponsors for this conference. And it had this very visual imagery that says, "How does technology further your social mission?" And I thought about that as a funder. I think about that today as a funder, but I thought about that as one supporting nonprofits about how to frame leveraging technology to support one's social mission. And when you think about that, when we talk about how do we position the request to a grant maker for technology, we always have to be mindful of that it's centered around capacity building. If we look at it, or at least how we traditionally have done this, we're always looking at it, especially from a funder, but also from a grantee. It's like, we're always asking our questions. How is this grant increasing your capacity to meet the needs of the community you're serving? You need to be thinking about how is this grant positioning your nonprofit to handle and increase demand on your services and address the project uptick in your work. And then also you need to be asking a question, how will this grant position your organization to expand into new lines of services, programs valuable to your community? So I always talk to nonprofits about don't think of it as a technology grant, but it definitely is a capacity building grant to help you enhance and improve the delivery of your social mission. But in doing so, the $1 million question or $100,000 question or whatever you're trying to get dollars for from a funder is, how is that funding request aligned with the funder's interest? Every philanthropic organization has a particular area of interest that they want to support, that they want to fund. And can you align your funding request to support their mission while also supporting your mission? And because the win-win for this is trying to identify demonstrable impact in that funding request. Now, that's how I suggest and make recommendations to nonprofits to support and how they need to leverage and reach out to funders. But I think it's also important for us to take a historical perspective about how have nonprofits been using technology. And if we start off, when we first started having nonprofits leverage technology 20, 30 years ago, it was just about digitizing our existing our existing processes. That was creating websites, creating, give now buttons and things of that nature, and just putting a digital presence on the internet about your delivery of services. It was more like brochureware. But then along came a way, and we began to understand how technology can really advance, and we began to get our sea legs. We started to focus on how can the technology make us more efficient, and how can we leverage data to help improve it. It was all about the data. And that, are we collecting data for ourselves? Are we being asked to collect data from our funders? But it was always about data. That was kind of the second wave, trying to optimize our effectiveness. And then in doing so, nonprofits started to look at technology like some would look at a cheap renovation in their home, that it makes sense, it looks great, but it really isn't fixing the core issues of why you're having a leak in your apartments, or why things aren't cooling properly in your home. You're just doing a lot of patchwork because you really weren't leveraging technology the way you should have. And then finally, where you see some nonprofits moving forward is they're looking at technology. How can they use that technology to support their constituents, to improve the daily lives of the constituents and the people, the communities that they're trying to serve? And they're trying to leverage technology. But you only see so few nonprofits actually using that technology for the betterment of the residents that they're trying to serve, whether it's the homeless and tracking for housing situations and shelters, whether it's for access to affordable quality food, and looking at different food banks and where food banks are or food shelters are in proximity to where one lives and stuff like that, and leveraging technology for that. But all of that in every step of the way, as more nonprofits began to advance the use of technology, there were always only a certain portion of nonprofits that kept advancing and maturing the use of technology. And there were those nonprofits that weren't able to keep up because of lack of funding, because of lack of skills, or both. And so we have this divide, if you will, with the maturity and the effectiveness of how nonprofits are leveraging technology. And I would say to that, when we look at, again, capacity, and we look at how we've been using technology, we really need to take a reboot and rethink about how we're leveraging this technology. For so long, we've been leveraging technology based on how private and corporate and commercial market forces have been telling us how this technology can help us and how we ought to be using this. But should we take a step back and use our understanding of our communities, use our understanding of our society to better understand how we can leverage existing technologies with the main goal of helping out our constituents? And that's the message that I really want to see, as how are we actually leveraging these technologies? How are we extending our utilization of these technologies, both in-house and externally with the people that we're trying to serve? So that's where I want to kind of tee it up, is really reframing what we call capacity building, which is about improving the operational, programmatic, and financial organizational capacity and effectiveness of your organizations, but also looking at it as technology is no longer an afterthought, but it's a generator of new programs, new techniques, new capabilities. And if we adjust our attitudes toward how we see technology and how we leverage technology within our respective organizations, then we can answer that original question that I said before: how is technology furthering our social mission? And that's the conversation that community organizations, nonprofits ought to be using to interact with grant makers. Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Leon, for your practical and wise words. And thank you, Ikem. It's really been a delight organizing this event with you and with Rideau Hall Foundation, and I really appreciate your leadership. And on a personal note, I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining today, despite the very challenging days that they've had and are going through today as well. So I'll take a few moments to set up our panel discussion, and then I'll invite our panelist, Wanda Brasco-Kennedy, from the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, and Jaka Blaise-Omar from Calgary Community Foundation, and Ikem to join me sequentially to share their thoughts. So my name is Katie Gibson. I'm with the CIO Strategy Council, which is a nonprofit focused on Canada's digital transformation, and focused on using digital and data standards to create a safe, secure, trusted digital ecosystem. I'm also a co-founder of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, which just launched. And we built the center because we're passionate about the role technology can play as an impact multiplier for nonprofits. It can really be a game changer for how we serve our communities, as Leon was mentioning. And yet, nonprofits aren't adopting tech at pace or at scale. So our vision is a digitally enabled nonprofit sector where Canada's diverse nonprofits use data and tech skillfully to multiply their impact. And I'd put this out there to everybody on this call. We're an open community of practitioners, policymakers, funders, academics, and welcome each and every one of you to join us in our work. And in fact, as a follow-up to today's conversation, we're going to be kicking off a working group focused on mobilizing grant makers to invest in digital capacity. That will be happening on June 13th, and we'll put the link to register for that in the chat. So this conversation about grantmaker practices is absolutely critical. We hear over and over from community nonprofits that they don't have sufficient funding to invest in the technology they need. Canada Helps ask Canadian charities why they may not be using software and digital tools to their fullest capacity, and the number one answer is not enough funding. Number two is lacking skills, expertise, and knowledge. To be a bit provocative here, we also hear from grant makers, we're funding these things for ourselves, but not for our nonprofit partners. So for example, in a US survey, 80% of foundations have sophisticated cybersecurity plans, but only 40% of the nonprofits that are funded by those foundations have the same. So what we want to address today is why are nonprofits still struggling to get the financial support necessary to fully function and thrive in the digital age? And in speaking to grant makers, there can be a sense of overwhelm about where to start. Digital equity is a huge topic, and a lot of grant makers don't know where to start, which bite to take first. So in collaboration with a few folks, I've started building out a framework for ways that funders can engage. Really, this focuses on identifying the outcomes that they can strive for with the support they offer. So traditionally, the conversation around digital inclusion and digital equity has focused on access and connectivity and digital literacy in the clients we serve. These are significant challenges. They remain significant challenges. And Wanda is going to speak to the really dire connectivity situation in many Indigenous communities. If we open the aperture, and if we want to just advance the slide, there we go. We can see that delivery capacity is also a significant priority. And that's the one that many grant makers are struggling with. And that's really the focus of what we'd like to dive into today. But I also want to highlight number 4, so the last one that will pop up. There we go. And that's that funders can and should also invest in rights and equity, really in shaping the tech that comes next. So this means helping community agencies have a voice in technology regulation, helping support the development of technologies that serve the needs of communities and not the needs of big tech, again, to echo a point that Leon made. The bottom line here is that we need to invest in using technology better and in creating better technology. So just to wrap up here, today's conversation is more about questions than answers. We want to explore how funders are currently asking for and responding to technology requests from grantees, how they know if they've made a good investment in a grantee's technology needs, what their current pain points are. Again, a lot of funders, are struggling with how to do this right. I can say, based on my many conversations, grant makers are often struggling with evaluating applications because they don't have the in-house capacity to properly evaluate a technology request. So I'll leave it there. Delighted to invite Wanda to join us, and perhaps she could give a little bit more of a robust introduction and offer her thoughts and responses. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Trent Eskenahan. It's really good to see everybody in the chat, and I can't see anybody but myself, so I'm going to wave to you because I'm really kind of just waving at myself. I'm coming today from the traditional territory of the Cayuga people and visiting a daughter at college here in Ithaca, New York. The discussion around digital equity and the holistic view of how to move things forward, it was a significant interest to the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund. And I just want to give a little bit of background so that you're all aware of who we are and how we came. And possibly the work that we have done shares a perspective and an approach around what many people call trust-based philanthropy. So in the beginnings of the pandemic, 4 individuals came together, and with a small amount of money that we knew with the pre-existing economic and health disparities that exist in Indigenous communities and from coast to coast to coast in Canada and in really all over Turtle Island, that the pandemic was not going to hit everyone equally. We all knew it. Well, maybe not at that time, but it unfolded for everyone as things went on. And in that moment of how can we best support the communities that we know, a group of Indigenous people came together and created the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, specifically in the first, what we thought was going to be maybe the year, to provide urgent relief to community, be it Inuit, Métis, and what's the multiple many nations under that we call First Nations. And in that, our partners came to us with unrestricted support, unrestricted funds, and therefore in that us reaching out, because we were completely and still are all Indigenous led, our reviewers were Indigenous led. You could call it participatory grant making with the review teams that we have. But what we ended up doing was just utilizing Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and how we would interact with other community members, and we applied it in a philanthropic lens. And through that, we went out to community and asked them, what is it that you need? Working from the truth that Indigenous communities have the brilliance and ingenuity existing in the community as right now. Yesterday, tomorrow, right now. They have the answers. They know their community best. And in the application process that we went out with, we didn't know what we were going to come back with. And we've been doing this we've done 25 intakes. We've been doing it for the last 20 months. And it really ends up being kind of a third. And the third it goes along exactly with what Leon and Katie and Ikam has said, is connectivity. We worked with the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, and they just did some initial research around basic internet in households, in First Nations specific, not including Inuit and not including Métis peoples, but the percentage of homes that have basic internet capability is 34.8%. That's like 50 megabytes, like 34.8%. So it didn't necessarily surprise us that the requests for communities included everything from hardware to software to training when COVID happened. One of the questions that we've been asked is, what have we been, I can hear something in the background. Is one of the questions that were asked with me is funding the technology needs of grantees, it's a term that we don't use internally, a priority for the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund? And if it is, what are you hoping to achieve? And has this perspective shifted over time? It's very interesting when we know that communities have the capacity and the ability, but what many needed was just a bit of support to facilitate their idea and then seed some answers. So the requirement or the request of what is it that we need, like is it fulfilling what we hope to achieve? Generally speaking, the answer is yes. It's fulfilling it because that's what the community needs. It is not pre-described. We don't pre-describe what a community is needing or asking for. And has our perspective, will it shift over time? I don't think so. We talk about trust-based philanthropy, we analyze it, we bring it forward. But what the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund does is, are we doing it? We ask ourselves every day, are we, if we put a mirror up to ourselves, as opposed to looking out at a lens, are we achieving the mandate that we said we were going to send out? And the answer is yes. So I really look forward to the question and answer period and hopefully engage with some of you a little bit more. So Nyawakoa.
Great. Thank you, Wanda. Like to invite Jacka to share her perspective now.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for that perspective, Wanda. My name's Jacka Bleamar. I'm joining you from Mohkinstsis in Treaty 7 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Iahe Nakota nations, and the Tsuut'ina nations, as well as Métis Nation Region 3. And also thank you, Ikem, for starting us off in a good way today with that acknowledgement. I work at Calgary Foundation, part of the grants team there, and also helping lead our racial equity journey. In Calgary Foundation is actually quite flexible with our funding, and so we support both programming and capacity building, and we have funded technology-related requests for several years. Prior to the pandemic, technology requests were treated similar to our approach to specialized equipment and needed to demonstrate how they would support the organization's programming and support for the clients and communities they were serving. They were often viewed through the lens of what would be the impact on those clients or communities. And some of the types of technology-related requests we funded include equipment and software, databases, CRMs, websites, technology assessments and roadmaps, IT infrastructure upgrades. We even did a video remote interpretation for ASL technology. So not unlike many other funders, we actually rarely paid for new computers for staff, as this was seen really as like a nice to have, which Leon outlined in his opening. The pandemic led to a shift in thinking from technology being a nice to have to really a basic need, both for individual community members, but as well as the organizations that are supporting and serving them. So as an organization, we're, as a funder, we're no longer questioning whether organizations need adequate technology to deliver on their mandate. And the pandemic also revealed the significant inequities in terms of access to technology, specifically for racialized families experiencing marginalization, Indigenous communities, seniors in particular, and newcomers. And so in our pandemic response and recovery funding, we did prioritize technology requests alongside other basic needs requests. And this was, rapid response funding with really simple application process and quick turnarounds. I guess in terms of context, the Calgary Foundation's grants assessment process includes volunteer committees, which make the final decisions on our grants. And we try to populate those committees with volunteers with various backgrounds and experience. And technology technology sector expertise has been part of our skills matrix for committees for a number of years. For example, one of our committee members, which I see from the chats is actually on this call, is Charles Buchanan, who's the founder of Technology Helps, which is focused on ending technology poverty for charities and nonprofits. So during the pandemic response, we used a pared down version of those committees. And we also participated in collaborative funding tables. And at those tables, the shift in thinking was also happening. So it wasn't just within our organization. I think it's important to acknowledge that, because of the rapid response during COVID and the focus on getting resource funds out the door as quickly as possible, the ability to do a detailed analysis of requests was really limited. and so we got lots of funds out the door to support access to technology, but I'd really be curious about what was the actual impact of that and what are the current community needs. We will continue to support technology related requests, and those are types of expenses that are eligible but not currently named as a specific priority in our funding. And I took a quick look at our recent, intake for one of our granting programs, and see that technology related requests have gone back down to pre-pandemic levels. And in looking at the model that Katie shared earlier, I would say that we have primarily supported, the first category in terms of delivery and capacity, as well as literacy of technology. We've received a few requests that were related to access and connectivity, so access to internet. But in regards to, number 4, like rights and equity, that it would be definitely an area for growth for us, I would say, as a funder. We did recently support an initiative called Inclusivity, which offered inclusive and equitable technology testing, and that was a really interesting initiative for us to learn about. And we did apply an equity lens in terms of access to technology when we were supporting, determining which funding to support, especially during the pandemic. And so moving forward, I'd like to see more coordination of support for access technology. Things like, does bulk purchasing make sense, or even redirecting of resources from one organization to another. I'd like to know more about, what happened to those families which were able to get loaner laptops in the early phase of the pandemic. Does those needs still continue for them? And if so, how can we help to address those? We're also seeing several organizations that are planning for hybrid models of program delivery. So how can we help to build the needed capacity to make these adaptations? How can technology help us to leverage data, and specifically disaggregated race-based data? And then, given the significant role of social media, how can we build capacity to engage effectively on social media with safety and security as top of mind, and helping organizations leverage social media to advance their mission? So really looking forward to collaborating more on this and further conversation.
So I think we're going to hear from Ikem now.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much, Jack. I just want to pick up from when you left there. I think going on with the work that has been happening here at the Rideau Hall Foundation, our sort of focus has been on a number of things: how we can build out the capacity of the organizations that connect to us. We work in a very concerted and dedicated partnership way. We do make some grants and we do fund some things in technology. I will use the example of the Catapult program, which is one of our signature programs on the learning team that is focused on eliminating barriers to learning. We do make some grants that have to do with the technology that is being used as a tool for either, like some others have mentioned, for connectivity, for greater access to courses, online modules, or things like that advance the learning journey of any individual. Our philosophy is that where we can, as a foundation, can invest in technology as a tool, we go there. We know, however, like has been mentioned by others, some of the challenge is that there isn't an established baseline in the sector of, what is the bare minimum actually, no, not the bare minimum. What is an acceptable standard of technology capacity that an organization ought to have or should have in order to be able to run its programs, connect to its community? Someone mentioned that, I think Wanda Wazida mentioned that sort of discrepancy in the level of sophistication of capacity of technological capacity of foundations versus those very organizations that they fund. So how can we lift some of that lift that floor so that organizations are better supported to have their security infrastructure be as sophisticated and safe and capable as those foundations that are funding them? It's in preparing for this call, one of the things that we started talking about as well was how technology has changed over the years. Now, for some of you who have been in the technology and grant making space for a long time, there was a time not so long ago when things like software were, being treated as capital costs. It was equipment. You bought a floppy drive. At some point, it became CDs or downloadables. But now we're seeing a shift in the technology where some of the software and operating software that we're using for our work are licenses. Even that change in the technology is precipitating a change in our policies and how we react and fund when you are providing grants that are time bound. So how do you fund an organization properly to get a license for a piece of software that is critical to their work, but you only invest in it for the length of whatever project you're funding? What happens at the end of that project? It is this sort of embedded sort of continuity that is important so that organizations can move from project to project with in a seamless way with the technology that supports them to do the work that they're trying to do. Jaka made an excellent point about some of the discrepancies that we're also seeing in the impact and effect of the pandemic on communities. Yes, it has been necessary and encouraged for all of us to pivot and find ways to transition a lot of the work that we do to working in the virtual and online space, and in some cases a hybrid. But what about in cases where that is not possible? For many of the partners that we work with, either for reasons that have also already been mentioned, access to robust internet connectivity, even just space in the home or a place where they can connect with a device or a device with which to connect. Those are all, factors that are playing out in different ways in different communities, in different locales, all across the communities that we work with. So as a foundation, we're trying to be intentionally introspective about how we are supporting our partners in the ways that make sense for them and make sense for the work that they're doing. It's a learning process for us because some of this is work that we're getting into for the very first time when it comes to some of the grant making stuff. But the conversations and the things that have been mentioned by you, Leon, Katie, Wanda, and Jaka are things that we're engaging with as well on our end, and that our funded projects are also feeding back to us as ways in which we can improve the supports that we are providing to them. So I want to stop there and bring in the rest of bring in Katie and the rest of the group so that we can get into some of the questions that you've shared with us as we've been preparing with this and see where this goes.
Fantastic. Thank you to each of you for your really wise words and very grounded in your experience. So I think you've all touched on these questions in a few different ways, but I'll invite anybody to chime in. First question is just to talk a little bit more about your own challenges or pain points or barriers as grant makers when you're investing in the technology needs of your communities.
I can start then. This is Leon. Our challenge, because we are a community foundation here in Cleveland, Ohio, is having to support a multitude of grantees or nonprofits and with their technology challenges. That becomes a hard part. We always ask ourselves, if we do it for one, then we got to be prepared to do it for all. And all might mean 300 or 400 nonprofits within the greater Cleveland area. who do you go with? So it's really a challenge, especially when, as I mentioned before, you have a lot of nonprofits that really have next to nothing. Yeah, they have computers. Yeah, they have internet access in their offices or maybe even their home. But the talent, the skill set, the training to leverage that compute that equipment, as well as additional types of technological services like cybersecurity and things of that nature, it becomes very hard for us to find a way to support individual nonprofits at the expense of supporting all.
Mhm. I can jump in, Leon. That makes so much sense because it's really reflective of what we kind of came up against. As I indicated, when we went out with the first initial calls, we've done 25. We didn't know what we were going to be getting because we utilized in practice trust-based philanthropy, and we had everything from hardware, software, training, bandwidth. We learned in Nunavut, so in the high north, that some costs for the slowest internet in the country, it was $1,000 a month. So ours was varying from Chrome pads to schools not having what the kids needed, and then just sheer connectivity. Uh, we ended up having to do some prioritization in terms of what was most urgent. So now that we're coming through the pandemic, the opportunity that we have is and how we're going about it is going back into the communities this summer and asking them, just like we did when we began, what is it, what areas would you be interested in, are in most need. So we have received requests from over 800 Indigenous led nonprofits and charities, and we'll be going back out to those groups that are interested, and asking them where is it that we can best support. So we do know that technology will probably be a part of it. Technology, mental health, cultural health, and we believe anyway that it will be food security, food sovereignty, food justice. But so we're just at a pivot point of unfolding what our next potential challenge will be and how we're going to respond to it.
Super. And oh, go ahead.
I would just add quickly a piece around coordination. How do we support that coordination to support various communities? I think especially during the pandemic, we saw a lot of grassroots initiatives coming up and groups coming up wanting to provide that support because the communities they were a part of and supporting were significantly impacted by the lack of technology. But there's a lot of need for that connecting across with existing organizations or with other initiatives. And so what can be our role in supporting that coordination, and for us to even have a better sense of what the current needs are? That's what I would add.
And just to build on this question a little bit, and I do see some good questions rolling in from the audience, so I'd like to reserve some time for those. But just want to touch on this a little bit. So we want, grant makers want to set up funding partners for success. But, as we've heard and as we know, technology isn't necessarily an area of expertise for most grant makers. So they don't necessarily know, what are the right cybersecurity tools, or, what is the proposed budget for developing and maintaining this app sufficient? So question for all of you is what supports do you think grant makers themselves might need to ensure that they're making the best investments that they can? And maybe Leon, do you want to start us off on that?
Sure, I can start on that. So two things. One, if that foundation or that grant maker has an IT director or has a CIO, leveraging that particular in-house resource to review and give feedback on those respective grants. That's what I do at the Cleveland Foundation, and that's why I encourage a lot of my other peers at other major foundations here in the U.S. to seek out and do likewise, because it does help out the program officers and program directors on those particular matters. Another thing, if that particular grant maker does not have an IT director or CIO that has the capacity to do that, then finding an IT consulting company that you can then maybe from time to time bring in and say, hey, can you give me some feedback on this particular grant request? Your thoughts, perspective, does it make sense? Does it pass the smell test? Things of that nature.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would add to that. Also, it's also part of a question that was raised here. I think educating ourselves internally about what the actual technology needs are, and that they're different from community to community and project to project, and also a certain level of humility and agreeing or understanding that we might not know, we might not be the best people to make that determination about whether a particular piece of technology is the right one to use. So outsource that capacity, hire someone, contact someone, engage a body that can allow us to do a better job of understanding if the tech is the right one, so that we can focus on the things that we actually know more about around the community engagement, the impact of the work, and the mission related stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned that our process includes community volunteers and that we bring in volunteers with various backgrounds. But our process really is about asking questions of organizations to get a better sense of, the project that they've put forward, to get a sense of, do they have a good understanding of what they want to do? When it comes to technology requests, often we're trying to get a sense of where they're at in the process. Have they done a lot of research already, or do they need the resources to actually do that research? Have they engaged, a consultant, for example, to help them with this? And if they're at that really early stage and they're not planning on doing any research, we usually would encourage them to do that and say that we're willing to fund that. But I think as a funder, it'd be valuable to have a better sense of what kind of questions should we be asking of organizations, perhaps in line with some of the tools that are that have been developed over the years in terms of grant making with an equity lens. Like there's a series of questions for us to be asking now as grant makers to get a better understanding of initiatives, and the same I think could be applied for technology without wanting to consider ourselves as experts, like Ikem is saying, but really, what should we be looking for? And if there are gaps in what's being proposed, how can we help organizations identify those?
Great. So let's move on to a little bit of a lightning round, just conscious of time. So our friends at the Technology Association of Grant Makers based in the US, they had a recent panel that offered some tools and some tips for grant makers. Would love your feedback on a few suggestions, maybe just a thumbs up, thumbs down, a couple of words, so we can get through these quickly and just get a sort of pulse check on them. So one suggestion is, stop treating technology as overhead and, sort of cramming it into that line. Build a line item into every program and every budget for technology needs.
100%.
Thumbs up from Leanne. Thumbs up from the panel.
And Katie, this also connects to a comment someone has made around how are we as grant makers categorizing technology, right? What are we considering basic and what is not, right? So to this, I say yes. If once wherever we can establish what that level is, and just make the assumption that if you're going to do work in this sector, there are some things that we understand you must have, whether you've asked for them or not. In the same way, sometimes we complete contracts to do work We ask the consultants or clients to have a certain level of insurance when they're doing certain things. So these are things that I feel like we can start to build in automatically into the work that we do to support the outcomes that we're actually seeking.
Fantastic. Second one is engage tech experts to help evaluate the tech components of grants, which I know we've heard from Jacka and Leon on that. Thumbs up. Any other comments on that? Great, love it. Another one is in addition to offering sort of a technology line in program budgets, to actually offer specific category of technology capacity building grants. Any thoughts on that?
One of my questions would be around that. I would push back a little by offering specific technology. You make the assumption that you know what applicants need. So I'm a little maybe larger buckets rather than very specific would be that would be my only caveat to that.
This is Lan. I mean, when I hear technology capacity building, that, I have to ask the question, is that infrastructure, the internal operations as far as hardware, servers, computers, laptops, networking, stuff like that? Or is it the more strategic technology that you may be using to deliver your program, to engage with your constituents, so forth? So it could be, if they're talking about technology capacity building truly from an internal ops standpoint, then definitely thumbs up.
Okay. What about the suggestion of funders paying for a technology needs assessment or a strategic technology plan and/or an IT roadmap?
Yeah, we've done that previously. That's something we would continue to do. I think helping organizations get a better sense of what their technology needs are. Sorry, my dog agrees. Yes, it would be something I would support.
Great.
Yeah, I support it too, especially if that organization is truly committed to moving forward and investing in technology, to show that they have a vested interest in it, and it's not us as a funder almost commanding or directing that they do it.
Got it. I know there are programs like N10's Nonprofit Tech Readiness Program, which offers a cohort-based training and coaching to groups of 20 organizations. Is that something that funders should consider, as sort of enrolling a cohort of your granting partners in such a sort of technology capacity building program?
I say if the grantees are asking for it, if it is directed by them, I think the onus is on us to make it available and resource it, and make it known that we're willing to resource this as a value add to supporting the initiatives and projects directly.
I completely agree. It's like a granting collaborative, and us sharing it out to those that maybe have already applied or sticking it on, and the onus is on us to do the invitation in.
Okay.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say to that, I agree with them, but what it also provides is for those grantees to also cross-learn and do some shared learning. So now when they go back to their respective community, all from the same, potentially now they have additional resources that they can lean on beyond just themselves.
Fantastic.
I think one thing I'd like to flag also, if that's okay, is over the years, I've really seen how organizations have had to, what's the word? Either choose to put forward a technology request or another programming related request, and because of limitations around accessing funding, they've really had to make that difficult decision. And when we're having a conversation with them around, what is a priority for you as an organization? There's multiple priorities. Often that technology piece is a priority for the organization, but the under-resourcing of their existing programming means that they need to direct their grant application towards that programming support. So to me, it ties into a larger question around what level of, unrestricted funding are we providing in general for organizations so that they can, be advancing their mission in an effective way, and that they're not left to make those difficult decisions of, do we leverage technology to advance on that mission, or do we continue to keep the lights on and keep our programs going?
Yeah, absolutely. Last one, and I'd like to tie it into one of the audience questions. So we have, how can we get the philanthropic and nonprofit sector to operate less in silos and come together around these initiatives? And I guess the question I'd have is, to what extent can and should grant makers be investing in the ecosystem in, initiatives like the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, or others who are, really trying to sort of take that sector view on the work?
I think we should absolutely be coming together and investing in those ecosystems. I think not doing so is inefficient. It's not just, it's a waste of time and resources. And we end up potentially funding things that work at cross purposes with one another. And our partners in community end up spending way too much of their time, energy, and effort duplicating grant applications for us. So yes, greater collaboration that can leverage the economies of scale for us to actually be able to partner with larger technology providers to move the needle on this conversation in a meaningful way.
Thank you. And I know we could keep discussing these questions for a while. I recognize we have just a couple of minutes left. Want to make sure that EChem has enough time for your closing remarks.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation. We weren't sure if we would need an hour or 90 minutes for this, or we would have your attention and availability for 90 minutes, but clearly we needed more time. So first of all, thank you, Wanda, Jaka, Katie, and Leon, for agreeing to be a part of this conversation, and for all over 200 of you who joined and are listening and will watch this recording afterwards. We will share some information in the chat to connect to all of our organizations and us to continue this conversation, connecting to the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience as well. That is one of those tangible and ongoing actions that we're looking at as a sector for how we can start to make a difference on this. And with one another, our commitment is that this conversation is the beginning. We intentionally had this one be a conversation amongst funders and people working in the funding sector. The next part is we will look at the questions that you've sent in. And in fact, those of us on this call will get an opportunity to maybe respond in a fuller way to those questions and send the response out publicly. And we will likely also be organizing another event where we will bring in community partners to talk about some of these things that we were just talking about here today. So on that note, I would like to thank all of you for being a part of these conversations. As we started with, it is important that we continue to not only do this work, but live and continue to respect each other and ourselves as humans, as relations, with all of our relations working together across this amazing place that we call home. And we will be here, and we will continue to be here. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.
We're clear.
We are out.